is scarce and the people go hungry. Silvia watched her kind starve once. She won't let it happen again. This is Bloodline in the Tree Leaves. Knola. She opens her eyes, and the world is black. She feels her breath hitting against the cloak pulled over her head, desperately wriggling at the mercy of her hands being bound together, yearning for freedom, yet doomed to the bullet with her name on it. One shot to the head. If they have any mercy, they'll end her quickly, without warning. For her, that's the best way to go. A public execution. Things sure are changing in Revere County. No one knows exactly when it happened, but the county people are losing faith in their head of household, Frank Revere. They're siding with his advisors. Every day, Frank loses more of his empire. Maybe the desperate families got tired of being hungry. They need more hunters, better hunters. So they called Silvia. That's right, owner of the most prominent hunting company in the world, Bloodline Incorporated, or Bloodline Inc. for short. And everyone knows her fee. One human sacrifice. Maybe Frank's too old, too set in his ways. So much so that he's not here to stop the execution of his only daughter. Because the cover of night is never permanent, Cassius Healer steps forward and begins his opening speech.
Alright, settle down,
he says to the crowd standing unorganized between a gap in the woods.
We are gathered here tonight to hold trial for Miss Knola Revere.
Cassius announces. So everyone is clear who is who. He removes the cloak over Nola's face. Her first breath is a gasp, followed by heavy panting. The midnight sky and strategically placed stand-up lights are more than she thought she'd ever see again. If her prosecutors had any mercy, they'd kill her quickly and get it over with.
But before we pass judgment, I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone of the charges against Miss Revere.
Then he pulls out a small scrap of paper and reads from a list he wrote. In the last 6 years, Knola has attempted to free the Maker family 4 times. She hasn't been successful, unless you count 8 months ago, when one of the older Makers came up missing after Knola led the family down a river path in the woods. But everyone thinks he died in the woods. When Cassius finishes his list, the crowd nods and agrees, and Knola is kneeling down wondering, what's the point of this trial if everyone wants her dead anyway? Walking away from the crowd and toward Knola and the others on death row is the one person Knola is sure she hates. Her oldest cousin on her mother's side, Ornthral Hiller, who also happens to be the oldest son of Cassius Hiller. And emphasis on mother's side, because Knola associates with those people as little as possible, including her mother. The moment Knola locks her sight on Ornthral's perfectly cropped golden hair, his smooth complexion, those ocean blue eyes, she immediately fights the urge to carve his face with the blade like a pumpkin. Not that she could with her hands tied.
I just want to add, it pains me to see my dear cousin this way, but her countless acts of rebellion have left us no choice.
Orthrol says. Knola almost laughs. The law in Revere County is murky at best. People steal. It's not like there are any police officers, so as long as you don't get caught and beaten half to death by who you steal from, who's going to stop you? And anyone in close ties with the Revere family, they're pretty much immune to any kind of punishment, even murder. As long as you don't kill anyone from the Maker family, because their services are needed to keep the Reveres as one of the three main families. And God forbid Knola try to free the Makers. That apparently makes her Satan.
As you already know, the Makers are essential to upholding the balance between the three main families.
Cassius continues.
God himself has blessed us with their service.
The talk of God blessing the three main families with the Makers didn't start till recent years, but now it makes some of the county people feel like they're in a cult, so they go with it. Then, when Knola started arguing against the idea, she became the official black sheep of the family. She has a hard time accepting that God turned the Maker family into slaves. No, the three main families turned the Makers into slaves. Anyway, Cassius continues.
Okay, all settle down, all settle down, all settle. In the case of Miraparaga, believed to have aided Knola Revere in her most recent attempt of rebellion. What say the audience tonight?
Cassius removes the cloak from Miraparaga, a hair salon owner who always leaves her shop unlocked on Sundays because her husband cleans on Sundays on his way from work. That's the only way Knola knew to hide the Makers in there during the last escape. She's talked to Mira every now and then, but Mira had nothing to do with the escape. She's not even connected to the main family. Cassius holds a 44mm Magnum revolver to Mira's head as her eyes burst into tears and she begs for her life. These aren't fake tears either, or pleas from a guilty woman who knows how to lie. These are tears of a woman who's done nothing wrong. She's on her knees crying her innocence to the crowd, but her cries fall on deaf ears.
I'm sorry. This is Baraka.
Knola whispers from a few yards away from her. Knola can't tell if Mira heard the apology through her begging, or if it even matters. Then, a familiar voice says Nola's name. She hears it coming from behind. It takes her a second to make out who it is with her eyes, but from the voice she already knew it was Natalia Maker, standing next to a dying tree with her little brother, Trev. It's because the Maker kids divert her attention away from Mrs. Paraga. That's why Knola jumps when the gun fires. Unprepared and heart racing, what follows is a lifeless Mira Paraga hitting the ground. Knola didn't even hear the verdict. Or was there some kind of head-nodding system? Shit, what does it matter? Mira's dead. She had nothing to do with this.
May she find peace in the afterlife,
says Cassius, his fat body half bowing to the audience like he just performed a concert. There's a rage in Knola shaking limbs. She can't take her eyes off of Natalia and Trev Maker, especially because Trev has now wet himself at the sound of the gunshots. looks down on her, disgusted and disappointed.
Just look at you.
Cassius says,
Obsessed with these damn makers, even till the end. You're the one who put a bullet in that woman's head, but you don't even care about her. Always worried about the makers, the makers, the makers. You're as deluded as your father.
Knola can't help but absorb Cassius's words. He's right. She's obsessed with the makers, has been since she was a child growing up with them around the family. She does feel guilty about Mira, and she doesn't know what kind of person it makes her that she's already forgotten about Mira. She can't speak on that now. All she knows is that Mira's dead. She's not coming back. There's nothing Knola can do for her anymore. Natalia and Trevor, on the other hand, are still alive. Nat, as Knola always calls her, and Trev, of all the members of the Maker family, Knola has grown especially attached to these two. That's probably why they brought her here. Cassius and Ornthral know they can't kill the Makers, but they can force them to watch Knola die. Natalia's 12 years old and just clever enough to be a perfect friend to Knola. Even though Natalia is 6 years younger, like most Makers, Natalia has peanut butter skin, dark hair, and is a wizard when it comes to engineering. One of the side effects of radiation exposure. Most families show symptoms, and it's always hereditary. Subtle mutations. For example, the Makers are born with natural engineering and inventing skills. Something's triggered in their brains. Anyway, Natalia was always smart, and she grew up with Knola. They became like sisters. That's why most of the nice clothes Knola gets, she passes down to Natalia, if they fit her. It's also why Knola makes sure the men around Revere County keep their hands off of Natalia, because sometimes men can get affectionate with the slaves. Knola can't see her father allowing such things, but a lot goes on behind his back. And then there's Trev, the mentally handicapped boy who waits for Knola before crossing the courtyard because the ant mounds scare him. The boy who held her hand when she broke her leg practicing backflips. The boy who calls her Noah because he struggles to pronounce the L in her name. Her reason for waking up in the morning. He's everything she loves about life, wrapped into a perfect little package. He has to be an angel. And as for his disability, no one knows for sure. The Reveres don't bother having him diagnosed. He's not one of them, he's just a Maker slave. But it doesn't take a hard look to tell. Something's off about him. The way he jitters when he walks, his blank stare, how he struggles with basic sentences, all of that. But sometimes Knola likes that Trev is, she calls it, different. He fails to see the unfairness of the life he was born into. Either that, or he looks past it. Either way, she envies that side of Trev. No one has ever seen Knola beg. Maybe if she wasn't so fake with her family, the community, pretty much anyone but the Makers, putting on a face of a happy 17-year-old heir to the Revere family throne. She learned that keeping her feelings to herself can be her strongest weapon. That's how she plots all these escapes, in plain sight, yet in the shadows. Knola knows her time is running thin when the crowd gets antsy again. When suddenly she notices the second person to her right, unmasked by Cassius Hiller. Regal Soaks. Another nobody. An old, Burly man with less life in his eyes than Knola has ever noticed. Not that he's the liveliest man on the planet. He's just a maintenance worker for Revere Tower. Quietly works his hours during the day, then goes home to his 3 dogs who haven't been exposed to radiation, so they never try to eat him. Knola struggles to remember 2 words she's ever said to Regal. He usually minds his own. But she did have to steal his set of keys from him when she was releasing the Makers. Knola begs and tries to stab, but her cousin Ornthral holds her down. She bites the first hand he puts on her, but the bastard's got 2 of them. If her hands weren't tied, Knola would mop the floor with him. She's powerless when Cassius raises his revolver again. He's surprised to hear Knola cry out for someone other than the Makers. She can't stand the thought of another dead body on her conscience. And Regal looks so content with death, he's emotionless. Doesn't he have a family? Won't he miss his dogs at least?
In the case of Mr. Regal Soaks, from whom Miss Knola Revere received a set of keys, allowing her to set free the Makers. What say you?
Cassius asks the crowd. They all reply at once. Knola screams. She's too late. The gun fires, and Regal Soaks leaves this world like he lived it, quiet and cooperative. A familiar sensation courses through Knola. She can only categorize this feeling somewhere between guilt and regret, similar to what she feels every time her escape plans fail, but to a lesser degree. She reminds herself that Cassius and Ornthral won't kill the kids. They can't. That alone brings her a small gleam of comfort. When the crowd calms down, a man who isn't a hunter but serves as a bodyguard for members of the Revere family checks a device he has in his pockets. Hardly anyone's paying attention to him, but the confusion on his face is enough to draw a few eyes around him. He pauses for a second, fixated with a reading on his device. He appears to come to terms with whatever he's seeing and walks up to Cassius' healer immediately. Knola can hear him whisper into Cassius's ear.
Sir, someone's on the property,
he says. Ah, of course. It's the barrier system the Makers set up around Revere property line to let them know whenever someone comes near the tower. It sets off an alarm when a person or creature enters the invisible barrier around the tower, making it impossible to infiltrate Revere Tower, unless you know its blind spot. Knola and the others are in the middle of the woods just inside the property line, so their heat signatures have already been accounted for.
At this time of night, is it man or beast?
Cassius replies.
It looks human-sized, sir.
The guard responds. Cassius's next expression is more dumbfounded than his first. Not that a savage animal wandering the woods would be any better, but at least he'd understand it. Who in the world would be coming to Revere Tower at this time of night? And with no army, so it's not like it's an attack. Cassius decides to move quickly.
Find them,
he orders. The guard nods and takes another guard with him into the woods. Knola watches the whole thing happen, knowing that the 2 men Cassius sent off aren't hunters. They couldn't track a clown in a circus. There's more haste in Cassius's movements. First, he orders Ornthral to stay with the children. Their window of time was short already, to hold the trial and execute the ones believed to be involved in the jailbreak. Then cover up Nola's death, make it look like she was eaten by a creature, discard of her body so there'd be no evidence for her father to find when he wakes up in the morning. Now Cassius knows he must end this trial soon. He quickly regains control of the situation by aiming his gun at Knola. Without hesitation, he asks the crowd,
In the case of Knola Revere, what say you?
There's a brief silence, almost like a build-up. After all, this is what they came here for. To rid the community of hard-headed Knola Revere, so that the balance of power between the three main families will be preserved. Knola can hear Nat calling her name and crying. And Trev is crying too, but his cries remind her of the sound a branched elk makes when it's in heat. It almost makes her laugh. She closes her eyes. She accepts that she won't be there for the Makers ever again. But at least they made her smile. One last time. Knola braces herself for the final gunshot. The crashing noise startles them all, coming from behind the crowd of spectators somewhere in the woods. It forces everyone to huddle closer together, as if searching for warmth in an ice storm. Cassius points the revolver in whichever direction he thought he heard the sound come from, which first faces him west, then southwest, then out of paranoia, back west again. He calls into the woods, asking who's there, then calling the names of the two men he sent away, but no one answers. The group as a whole all face in the same direction, anticipating someone or something to emerge from the darkness of the tree shadows. Silvia. She takes a deep breath and the air is moist. Her hands rest neatly on the arms of the wooden chair that wasn't here a minute ago. She brought the chair with her when she slipped next to where Knola has been kneeling. It's not surprising. Hunters of her skill can move this swiftly, and she's the best there is. Knola is the first to notice Silvia, who seems to have appeared out of nowhere. The stand lights just barely capture her charcoal-colored hair. One by one, everyone faces Silvia, frozen in amazement at how she was so quick that she was able to pop up here undetected. From a glance, the crowd almost looks entertained, but through closer examination, it's obvious that no one is smiling. Then again, no one ever smiles when Silvia is around. Except Silvia. Casually sitting less than a few yards from Knola is the deadliest woman in the world. Countless murders on her resume. More control of the hunting profession than anyone prefers. Founder of the Hunter Apprenticeship Program, where she passes down her knowledge to select students, and they're eventually hired as full-time hunters. For a price. Even though no one trusts her, most want her dead, and the three main families consider her an outlaw. They always come to her to train their young hunters. Aspen spiders, three-horned redbucks, armored megs. This world is littered with wild animals mutated from radiation. Families need hunters, good hunters, so they turn to Silvia to train them. But because the families rely on her so heavily, she kills who she wants without being questioned. This includes hunters from other hunting companies. She's made a reputation of eliminating her competition. Can't have them stealing her work.
I never get invited to the good parties.
So, Frank did have a child.
Silvia says while glaring at Knola Revere. He's about 30 years older than Silvia, which puts her in her mid-30s, but as physically sharp as she's ever been.
How did you? When did you?
Knola stutters while scanning the wooden chair as if it can't be real. It wasn't here before. She wasn't here before. Can a person really be that smooth?
You are very ugly with your mouth open like that. But with it closed, not so much. Pull yourself together. You know who I am.
Silvia calls Knola.
Silvia, what are you doing here?
Knola simply states, and Silvia nods.
No. What are you doing here? The only daughter of Frank Revere, the head of the Revere family, with bodies and poodles of blood by her side. I'm curious.
Silvia puts on her classic smirk of arrogance. Cassius steps forward, but not too close. He doesn't want Silvia to react in defense.
Silvia? Silvia! We weren't expecting you till tomorrow. Please excuse this.
No. I wasn't talking to you yet.
Sylvia cuts him off. The crowd grows restless, and Cassius, being the pride-driven man he always is, feeds off their discomfort. A piece of him can't let anyone, including Sylvia, talk down to him. It's this same piece of him that slowly lifts the gun in his hand, but he stops before it gets past his waist.
Cassius. You're a smart man. Is that really how you want to die?
Sylvia asks, without even looking his way. His quivering arm lowers back to his side. He knows challenging Sylvia is suicide. Did she come to take them all as sacrifices? As Knola watches Sylvia stand out of her chair, she's scanning her body for weapons. After a few seconds, she spots 2 double-barreled pistols on her waist and a hunting knife sheathed in her ankle holster. Knola barely spots it when Sylvia steps closer and her pant leg rises a bit. Knola tenses up when Sylvia wraps around to her backside. The sound of Sylvia unsheathing her knife is followed by a feeling of relief when Nola's bounds are cut and her hands flop to her side. Suddenly, she feels life in her fingers, flexing them in and out as though she was grabbing the air.
Take a seat.
Sylvia orders Knola. Sylvia's open palm guides her to a second chair sitting behind Cassius Hiller. He didn't notice it until now, and Knola almost knocks him over when she sits in it. Somehow she feels, if Sylvia says to do it, it overrules anything Cassius can do to her right now. There's something that attracts Nola's eyes to her cousin Ornthro. Something told her to look up, like a sixth sense, or a voice ordering her to leer into his soul because he's leering into hers. For a moment, they're just staring at each other. Ornthro is a lot less brave now that his cousin can fight back. Knola says in a way someone says to a person they haven't seen all day. Sylvia looks intrigued. She says. Ornthro breaks his glare away from Knola because now is his chance to win Sylvia's approval. He bows before her with his eyes closed.
Miss Silvia,
He addresses her because no one knows Sylvia's last name.
we were preparing the sacrifice you asked of us. And who better than the only daughter of Frank Revere?
Ornthro was chosen to be Sylvia's new apprentice. He was set to leave with her tomorrow, and the sacrifice was going to be chosen by the head of household. But the advisors decided to make that decision themselves. It's not that Ornthro is some great hunting prodigy, just that he's young, healthy, and good-looking. Perfect candidate to represent the family. Sylvia's eyes shift from Ornthro to Knola, then back again. She didn't come here to judge Ornthro Hiller, but finds him particularly disgusting for handing over his cousin so carelessly.
Never bow to anyone.
Silvia tells him as she walks back to her chair.
Do you know why?
The confusion on Ornthral's face is so obvious it's pathetic. It's one of the many rules of being a hunter. Never let your guard down.
Bow. You lose visual. Makes you vulnerable.
Knola answers. Silvia is impressed, but doesn't show it.
So, someone here does have a brain. Oh, I have a perfect idea. Let's play a game. I'll count to 3 and shoot 5 people in the face. And before anyone asks, I know what you're all wondering. But Silvia, who are you going to shoot? That's a good question, pretend audience member. Let's make it simple. The first 5 people to move a muscle get their brains blown out. What do you think? Fun, right? Okay, let's get started. 1, 2, 3. Really, guys? You think I'd kill innocent people for fun? What do you take me for? A lunatic? You guys are no fun.
Silvia's looking up at something in the trees. People want to follow her line of sight, but at the same time, no one dares take their eyes off of Silvia. She's too unpredictable. Then Knola finds the courage to look up when it becomes obvious that whatever Silvia's staring at needs to be identified. At first, the darkness makes it impossible to see anything. Then there's movement. It was subtle, but Knola is sure she saw the branches shake just a little, and it wasn't the wind.
Why do you come here?
Silvia asked the crowd.
Guess no one noticed the spider nest.
She picks up her chair and flings it into the nearby tree. The result is a giant cluster of broken branches and dead leaves, clumped together by what looks like spider webbing falling out of the tree and hitting the ground. Just as the remaining bits of web and nest fall from the tree, rattling can be heard, along with a high-pitched screech. It's the same crowd who were cheering for Nola's execution. Now they're frozen in fear. People say to stay out of the wild unless accompanied by a skilled hunter, especially in these parts of what used to be South America. Name a mutated species and it can probably be found somewhere in the 3 counties. Like the 12-foot apes with blue fur. They call them blue heels in the northwest. And down south, where they have the birds of sin, giant sparrow-looking things with black and gold feathers, beaks sharp enough to pierce metal, and 50-foot wingspans. Then of course, in Revere County, they have this plague of aspen spiders. But the wooded area sectioned off by metal fences are supposed to be safe. This area was surrounded with barbed fence to keep the aspen spiders from reaching the tower. There's a gate that leads back to the tower from here. Silvia strolls away from the crowd of people as if they're not even there. While she walks away, she's explaining the situation.
People like you aren't supposed to be here. Leave the wilderness to the professionals. I don't care if you die or not. But I'd say in less than a minute, an aspen spider is going to come looking for whoever ruined its nest. If I were you, I wouldn't want to be here.
Then she's gone, disappears into the darkness of the woods, and people are debating between following her or running back to town. That's when the rattling bushes behind Ornthral demands their attention. They can tell by the glimpses of white insect-like legs that it isn't human, and it's big. All of Nola's focus is locked on the creature now emerging from the bushes. Her eyes wide, she sees the arachnid legs are clearly attached to a long, thin torso, a saucer-like head, and 8 eyes. Each eye has its own tentacle connected to the head, so there's that. And the hairs on the bodies are pure white, with a hint of lime green. The spider must be at least 10 foot long, not including the length of its legs. An aspen spider, Knola says in her mind. She's frozen for a moment. She's never seen an aspen spider in real life, but that's definitely what she's looking at. It's a kind of mutant. No way a monstrosity like this existed back before the nuclear wars. Chances are it's poisonous, but Knola can't remember if it is or not, or how fast it is. Bet she's about to find out though. Natalia Maker has by now noticed the aspen spider creeping up behind Ornthal and lets out a screech that can probably be heard back at Revere Tower. Knola doesn't blame her. In fact, it's Natalia's cry that snaps her out of being frozen. Knola forces her lungs to breathe again, and her lips to move. She shouts just seconds before the aspen spider's sharp forearm can be seen piercing Ornthral's upper body and ripping out of his chest, with fragments of his bloody ribs falling to the ground. He didn't have time to react. A river of his own blood is rolling out of his mouth and down his neck. The look on his face is what makes it so hard for Knola to watch. During his last seconds of life, he's terrified. Then he dies with his eyes open. The crowd of people turn into a mad dash, the opposite way of the spider. They're gone within seconds. With the hurricane of panic that ensues, Knola can only think of one thing to do: save the Maker. A couple of painfully tight zip ties binding their wrists and ankles. Knola has to gnaw through them, which takes more time than she hoped. By the time she looks up, they're all alone, with the aspen spider chewing on Ornthral's body organs. No time to waste. They're all dead unless the spider eats Ornthral's body, and maybe the other 2 bodies, then gets its fill, but there's no telling how hungry it really is. As the race to escape begins, Knola thinks there might be a chance to live if they make it to the metal fence. 40, maybe 50 yards. The fence can't be much further than that. Navigating through the trees, mossy boulders, and shrubbery is one thing, but having to carry Trev on her back because he's not coordinated enough to run through an obstacle course-like field makes Knola slow. She can spot the top of Revere Tower through the trees because the moonlight reflects off the stone walls. The thought of returning to her family after everything that's happened tonight is frightening, but where else can she go?
There's the fence!
She shouts at Natalia as they're faced with a 20-foot tall metal wire fence that spans both directions as far as the eye can see. Knola frantically searches for the gate. Indeed, she finds it, but when they reach it, the lock has been set and there's no chewing through this problem. Knola has to think fast. She hears the screech of the aspen spider behind her. Knola shouts as she and the kids have nowhere else to go. The top of the fence can be climbed over if they can stand the spikes. So she sets Trev down because he's just too heavy for her to carry up the fence. She tells him to climb, and thank God he understands the situation is dire, so he starts climbing. They all do. Knola is reminded of how terrible a climber she is. What can you expect? She spends most of her training on the beach. The woods are just too dangerous to be here for long. The barbed edges on the outside of the cage make her climb that much harder, as her panicking makes it difficult to navigate around the spikes. She feels the spikes puncturing her bloody hands, but slowing down is not an option. If they can't scale this fence, they die. Knola almost makes it halfway off the ground, glances down, and almost cries at the sight of Trev refusing to climb the fence.
Please, Trev, climb.
Knola calls when she notices the two of them haven't gotten more than a few feet off the ground. Natalia tries carrying her little brother on her back, but she isn't strong enough. When Trev starts climbing himself, he lets go of the fence when his hands throb. Knola calls again. Trev breaks into a nervous panic, covering his face with his hands and curling up at the base of the fence. Natalia is brave, or she cares too much for her baby brother to leave him to die. Either way, she begins descending down to Trev, but Knola stops her.
Keep climbing.
Knola orders. Natalia hesitates, but trusts the only person who would never steer her wrong, besides her parents. So Natalia climbs as fast as her skinny arms will let her, and leaves the job of saving Trev to Knola. It's much easier climbing down the fence, especially when she can jump from here. Her hands burn from the metal rubbing her open cuts, but if they live, it'll be worth it. Knola plops to the ground once more and wraps Trev around her shoulders like a backpack. She feels his tears running down the side of her neck, but it's okay. She's got him. They can get away. That's what she thought. The spider marches all 8 of its legs out of the wooded bushes with hunger in its tentacle eyes, emitting a horrible cry and moving faster than Knola predicted. She thrusts her way up the fence, but again, she's not a great climber. And this time she's heavier and exhausted. All she hopes is that the aspen spider can't scale the fence, but she won't stop to find out. It probably can. Just look at it. It's a giant spider, for crying out loud. Her only chance is to beat it to the top, jump down, and run like hell. Knola ignores her fatigue and climbs faster. One of her sneakers gets stuck in the fencing, and she loses a couple of seconds yanking it out. Trev is holding on for his life, almost choking Knola. If his arms were a bit longer, Knola wouldn't be able to breathe. Her eyes watch Natalia make it to the top of the fence. She's done well. Now, all Knola has to worry about is getting to the other side with Trev. When Knola is confident she can make it to the top of the fence, she feels a tug. Then the weight on her back is removed. She hears Trev hit the ground before turning to see his helpless body laying in front of the aspen